The back cover acknowledges the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we work, and we pay our respects to Indigenous elders past, present, and emerging. Sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Dr. Anna Cody, welcome to the Back Cover podcast. How are you?
I'm really well and so excited about the launch of our report and our resources that we've been doing this week.
Absolutely. Well, you, of course, are the Sex Discrimination Commissioner at the Australian Human Rights Commission, and you've been doing vital work advocating for safer, fairer workplaces across the country. As you just mentioned, your new report, Speaking from Experience, really pulls back the curtain on the harsh reality of workplace sexual harassment in Australia. It centres the voices of over 300 people from diverse backgrounds, many of whom are too often left out of the national conversation. And what they've shared is powerful, disturbing, and urgently calls for change. So, again, Commissioner, thank you for joining me. Your report shows 1 in 3 workers have been sexually harassed, but for some groups, it's far worse. 70% of intersex people, 56% of First Nations workers, and 48% of people with disability. What does that say about how our systems are failing those most at risk?
What it shows is the complex way in which systems and structures can enable harassers to use vulnerability or particular identities of people against them. So what we heard over and over again was, for example, the impact of casual work on somebody. If you know that you're reliant on a supervisor to get another shift, or if you know that you might lose your temporary visa if you lose your job, or if you know that you have faced racism in trying to even get that job, then all of those factors, all of those systemic issues are going to impact on your ability to identify and also speak out against what is happening to you because you're so reliant on that job. And also the way in which racism and ableism can function within our society makes people doubt their understanding of what's actually happening. So it's that experience. What we heard of so many times was the use of the phrase, "Oh, it's just a joke," or "Don't you get the Australian sense of humour?" So that absolute combination of racism and sexism within the sexual harassment, which makes the person doubt, well, maybe I am, if they're a new migrant, is this what it involves working in a workplace in Australia? Is that the Australian sense of humour? So that horrible way of that harassers use power over somebody, but they're enabled to do that as well within the system. So it's not just the individual, it's also the system around, and making sure that those systems are actually centering the person who's experienced the workplace sexual harassment and that the responses are really apt for dealing with that. One of the other things that we heard when we were talking to young people was that they didn't understand what workplace sexual harassment is. If we think about, it's very common in Australia for people to start work at 14 or 15. And, I certainly started at 13. And we don't understand what a wage rate is, what an hourly rate is, what leave is, what our rights are at work, let alone what workplace sexual harassment is. So one of our recommendations coming out of our consultations was the importance of actually having that education within school so that people get that basic civics education about what are workplace rights from an early age.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you just mentioned, many people stayed silent because they feared losing work, visas, or being believed. One quote that stood out to me was, people will sexually harass other vulnerable people because they know we are vulnerable. They know we won't fight. How do we shift that power dynamic so survivors are protected, not punished?
So our recommendations, so we have 11 recommendations, are all part of the package for what we need to do to shift so that people will stop sexually harassing. And there's been some really great changes until now. We now have a positive duty, which is a requirement on all employers or persons conducting a business or undertaking to eliminate, as far as possible, workplace sexual harassment and other forms of hostile work environments on the basis of sex. So all of those have that requirement of leadership, of creating a culture, of having a good response. All of those things are absolutely fundamental for shifting the dialogue and the response to people who've experienced workplace sexual harassment. And the other things that we recommend are a national media campaign. We need to be talking about what is workplace sexual harassment, and we've got some great videos and resources on our website that we would encourage people to use and to have a look at. They are free and easy to download. So we need to educate about what is workplace sexual harassment. We also need to think about making sure that the process itself is simple, easy to understand, that a worker doesn't get confronted with a 50-page policy when they want to talk about workplace sexual harassment. Most people, I know I don't read a 50-page policy. I'll read the first 2 pages and then that's it for me. So we need to be thinking about how to make information accessible and easy to understand. And also thinking about creative, so transformative, innovative justice responses. So rather than it just being, one person loses their job or the other one leaves their job, thinking about what are other innovative approaches to dealing with workplace sexual harassment, which is why we have a recommendation for the Centre for Innovative Justice or somewhere like them to be funded to work with us to explore other ways of dealing with workplace sexual harassment.
Yeah. Absolutely. Commissioner, you've recommended limiting non-disclosure agreements in harassment cases. What damage are NDAs doing and who do they really protect?
They are doing a lot of damage, and who they're protecting is the harasser. They're certainly not protecting the person who has experienced workplace sexual harassment. What we heard over and over again is victim survivors telling us that they felt silenced. And that feeling of being silenced, not being able to talk about what has happened to them, just entrenches the shame and the harm and the absolute difficulty in recovering and healing after you've been workplace sexually harassed. So we are absolutely adamant that only if the person who's been sexually harassed wants one, should there be a non-disclosure agreement or confidentiality agreement. Otherwise, we should not be using confidentiality agreements. It only serves to protect the harasser, and also it's to the benefit of the employer to actually have it very transparent and accountable what they have done in response to a complaint of workplace sexual harassment. So they can use it to show that they take this issue seriously. So it doesn't have to impact on their reputation, which is often the argument that we hear for why we don't want to stop using non-disclosure agreements.
The report says some survivors felt re-traumatised by their employer's response. What does a safe, trauma-informed response actually look like?
So it involves treating the person as an individual, as a person. So really putting the person at the centre, treating them with kindness and compassion, listening to what they say. We have some beautiful resources which give examples of what an employer can say, which would be helpful to hear. And one of the questions we asked was, what is helpful to you, to victim survivors? And they frequently told us, treat us as a person, not just as a complaint, not just as something to be dealt with. Explain the options. Understand that evidence includes a person telling their story. That is evidence. So requiring additional levels of evidence, that may be helpful, but a person's story is evidence. So being really clear on that and giving the person options, referring them to free legal advice, for example, so they can work out what their best avenues are, and making sure that they're kept up to date with what is happening, as well about the process. And also, if there are cultural elements, if the person is a First Nations person, making sure that you seek cultural advice about how to deal with this particular issue. Because as a non-Indigenous person, you don't know what the best way, you don't know the ramifications on that person and their standing and their place within their community and their relationships. So it's important to recognise that and seek advice on it.
Yeah, absolutely. If employers are to take just one action from this report, what should that be?
I think it's culture, changing the culture in your organisation. And you do that by talking about it, by educating about it, by showing that you're taking it seriously and making perpetrators accountable.
Yeah, very well said. Well, again, this report is so eye-opening, and I thank you for all the work that you do, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Mbenga. Lovely to talk to you.
Likewise. See you.
Thanks for the interview.
All right. Bye-bye.